And I'm really excited to bring Clive Brewer on to SuperAthlete Radio today. Clive, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Chase. How are we doing?
I'm doing fantastic. And you told me before coming on here that you are now leading a group of performance centers and connected with orthopedics in Arizona. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. So I'm down in Scottsdale in Arizona. So there's I work for a company called Ortho Arizona. So we have 70 surgeons. There's 28 physical therapy clinics, and then there's now 5 performance centers that are embedded across that network. So we're ideally placed. We train teams, we train individual athletes, but then we've got rehabilitation athletes coming into us as well. So we've got everything here from high school athletes, general population, college students, professional athletes, all that kind of stuff. So we've got the complete gamut here that we work with on a daily basis. So it's exciting times.
It does sound like exciting times. And you've been in the space. You're definitely a veteran in the space. Could you tell us a little bit about how you grew up and how you got into it?
Yeah, by veteran, you mean I'm an old guy, right? I get it.
Yeah.
So, look, I mean, I guess like a lot of us, I grew up as a failed athlete, right? So I played a multitude of sports. I dabbled in trying to go professionally at a couple and wasn't never able to make it, but I always had a fascination with the human body and studying it. And I was lucky enough to grow up at a time in the UK where you could actually start to study the human body as an academic subject, So I did my first degree in sports science. I still remember now in my first lecture, we were looking at the 100 meters and dissecting it in terms of the biomechanics. So, which was, and I just remember, sitting there going, Jesus, this is it. This is where I want to be. This is what I want to be doing, So I studied sports science and then did a master's degree in sports science. And when I was doing my master's degree, I got my first break. And, it's that combination of luck and hard work, right? Where England Rugby were based at the university at Loughborough, where I was studying. And they needed someone to come and help them on a part-time basis to run some of the fitness work they were doing with the team. And that meant that I could, they offered me the opportunity to do it. And so I did. And so I studied full time. I eventually ended up working full time as well alongside my degree. And then the guy who was supervising me, unfortunately, went long-term sick. And I ended up at 23 years old on my own, like steering this ship, which was kind of scary as hell. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what mistakes I was making. But kind of muddled through, worked at it, asked some questions, was lucky enough to be surrounded by some right people. And that was how I got my start.
That's awesome. Yeah, I read a great book called Game Changers that talked about how much sports science played a role in terms of UK going from like 35th in the Olympic medal count to first, second, and third. And it seems like you were getting your degree right in the middle of that kind of time period. Did you kind of you had this interest, but did you kind of feel the receptivity of it coming back to you of like, we want really good sports scientists and how important it is?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I was doing my master's in 96, and that was when the Atlanta Games was on. And that was the game changer for us, was the Atlanta Games in the UK, because for a company that's got great in its title, we only won 1 gold medal. And honestly, we won 1 gold medal because of the athlete, despite of the system, if that makes sense. It really wasn't good. And so I think a lot of people at that point sort of woke up and smelled the roses and really were like, look, we need to get a lot better at what we're doing here, a lot more educated. And to be fair, the system really changed very quickly. Leading into Sydney, they created the UK Sports Institute, which became the Institute of Sport. They created UK Sport as an umbrella body. And the idea of UK Sport was literally that it empowered expertise, right? So suddenly, instead of before, we had an athlete and a coach, now suddenly you had government-funded agencies where there was a network of strength and conditioning coaches who, could very much learn from each other, support each other. There was a network of physiotherapists who became expert in sport. Sports medicine was suddenly recognized as a speciality. And I think what was really great was they all grew up together, working together and learning from each other. So, and I was lucky enough to be in very early in and amongst that process, so, and, and we could set up initiatives like the UK Strength and Conditioning Association, which was, built on the principles of science. Now, in the States, they'd had the National Strength and Conditioning Association for a number of years, but, we were lucky we could speak to the NSCA and look at the mistakes that they made in their early development years and learn from those, so we could shortcut that process, So it was a great time to be involved.
Yeah, well, it's absolutely transformative in terms of what you guys did. That department was able to accomplish. And how would you kind of define sports science in terms of what was missing out with UK's athletic program before and after? Is it just the importance of really diving into things and the importance of measuring and how would you kind of define that?
I think it was interesting. I think there was a ton of things missing, really, in the sense of we had sports science back in the day was a very academic program of study, and it covered everything from not just the science of sport, but exercise science and health and, and all those other things as well. And people were very, how can I say this? They were very scientifically driven, and the gym with a clipboard, and everything. We were like measuring and taking notes and stuff. And then, coming over to the US early in my career and being exposed to that, where coaches didn't have clipboards and they actually coached, and they were, it was, the clipboard wasn't something we could hide behind. You had to have a presence and you had to have a personality and recognizing that. So I think it was much more about, actually making it empowering the scientists to become coaches. And I think what we did really well in the UK at an early stage, which is something that, I've talked a lot about in recent years and, particularly since coming to the States, is it's never actually the discipline that leads the way. It's always the athlete that leads the way. So instead of saying, okay, you're the doctor, do the doctor stuff. You're the scientist, do the science stuff. You're the data analyst, do the data stuff. What we said in the UK was actually, what does the athlete need? And then once we understood what the athlete needs, it's okay, how do we solve this problem for the athlete? Doctor, you're the best person. Or data analyst, you're the best person. Or coach, you're the best person. And everybody else got in behind that plan. And I think that was where it really became, it started to come alive, where you started to see, British Cycling would do things with engineers. So they get the wind tunnels out and start looking at what's the most aerodynamic way to put someone on a bike. Engineer, go and design the system that enables that to do that. Strength coach, how do we work on the posture of the athlete to maintain the position that's the most ergonomically effective? And then how do you create the muscle infrastructure to be able to do that? And then physiologist, how can you advise the coach to put together an optimum training process so that the physiology leads it without it being something separate? It wasn't, the physiologist takes a session, the strength coach takes a session, now the athlete gets on the bike with it all became integrated. And I think that was the real excitement about it.
And then this idea of focusing on what the athlete needs, do you feel like that can transfer over to the general population for people who are trying to get healthy as well as a good way to, an efficient way to do that?
Yeah, 100%. Look, I mean, at a cellular level, the human body is the human body, right? Cells are the same. At a governing level, that principle doesn't work, right? Because the brain governs where the body wants to do, and because of our brain, thank God, it makes everybody an individual. And so, I mean, for example, in here, our general population athletes. Now, whether you come into the clinic here with an ACL, reconstruction, and you need to transfer back to normal life, or you're an Olympic athlete who's coming in with the ACL, you get your own program. Everybody gets their own program that they need, right? Because they've got different training times, different training capacities, different training backgrounds, different training interests. And so, at an individual level, it completely works. Now, there's a number of generic principles that are the same for everybody, right? But, we ask the athletes, like, what do you prefer a barbell versus a kettlebell? What do you like doing? Because the more general public you are, the more you're going to trend towards what you like doing, the more we're going to give you that to keep you coming, to keep you active, right? So it's a lot about, with the general public, it's a little of what you like and a little of what you need,
Yeah.
With athletes, obviously, that's a little bit different, but the same thing still applies. The athlete has to own their program, right? If the athlete doesn't own their program and doesn't get an input into it, And that's one of the things that I think experience has taught me. If you ask me 20 years ago, it's like, I write the program and I know what I'm doing and I'm the coach. Now it's very much when I write an athlete's program, it's sat down with the athlete and sat down with the coaching staff and asking them, what do you think works really well for you? And coach, what do you think is going to make this athlete a better player? And then we bring the two together with, okay, I've got the methods that I know will work to enable those things to occur. So the athlete involvement in their own program is still really important for me, regardless of what level they're at,
That's beautiful. I love that evolution of that. This is the way the program is compared to now a more collaborative process. I'd love to hear your take on, when you look at sports science, it goes beyond, like you said, it's very holistic. It goes beyond just the strength and conditioning program. It looks into things like reaction time, cognitive processing, sight, decision-making. Could you talk a little bit about how we serve our body impacts all those things?
Our body? I missed
like how we treat our body impacts all those things beyond more muscle or, more fat.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think that there's a great, and I think it was Aaron Coots in Australia who brought this out, and he literally said performance equals fitness minus losses due to fatigue, right? So what I often do is to map out is like, okay, so how do we define performance, right? And we can do it in a number of ways, whether it's results, time, weight lifted, et cetera, right? GPS data, tackles made on the field. There's a number of ways we can define performance. And then there's a number of ways that you can look at fitness, and all of them are influenced, and there's a number of ways you look at fatigue, right? So one of the biggest things that we can do to educate anyone involved in sport, and I say anyone because, I deal with a number of high school athletes now on a daily basis, and we have everything from I'm not training hard enough, but my parents want me to be a D1 athlete, to my parents want me to be a D1 athlete, or I want to be a D1 athlete, and I'm doing the workload that two professional athletes might actually do, So it's all of those factors all impact the performance piece, and what does that actually look like? So we spend an awful lot of time with athletes talking about, look, and again, you can cliche this all you want to, right? You can't out-train a bad diet, or, sleep is the biggest recovery aid, and people say to me about, should I take supplements? Should I do this? Should I do that? And it's like, look, until you're getting 8 hours sleep a night, forget anything else, So it's, we spend a lot of time talking about those lifestyle factors that impact upon, the training and the recovery process. It's really important.
Yeah, I'm a huge factor. We call them the fundamentals, but just dominating your fundamentals, your sleep, your breath, your focus, your nutrition, and your movement. And then, once you get that foundation, then you can go on to the next level. But without the foundation, it's really hard to really set yourself up for sustainable success.
100%. Yeah, and it's all about, like, a lot of that is about just developing good habits, and developing and also making good choices. I spend a lot of time with athletes talking about, and a lot of people say to me, well, athletes sacrifice, right? And like, I got to be honest with you, I disagree with that a lot. You make choices. Right? But you don't sacrifice. You make choices. If you want to be the best in the world, then, and like, even if you don't be the best in the world, just to be a professional athlete, it's the best life, right?
Yeah.
You get paid to do something you absolutely love to do, and you get to do it in a great environment with usually great people, right? And in order to achieve that status, you've got to make choices. Right? Now, everybody can go and get drunk on a Saturday night. You have to make a choice typically not to do that. Everybody can go and eat what they want to. You have to make a choice typically not to do that. But your choice isn't a sacrifice. It's a choice to get where you want to be, right? And if you don't want to be there, then you make a choice not to be there. Now most of us aren't gifted enough. Like, I gave everything I could and I still wasn't good enough, gifted enough, or didn't work hard enough, one of the three, to be able to make it. Right. But, I can look back at my career and, when my daughter was born, I was at the European Championships in France. Right. So I missed that. some might call it a sacrifice, others will call it a choice. It's time I'll never get back, and I always wish I was there. But it was definitely a choice at the time to make, and it's not. I have a fantastic relationship with my daughter, fortunately. But it is what it is. It's about choices. It's not to look at it as a sacrifice.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
And I think the other thing we talk about as well, and one of the guys at the last professional rugby club I was at summed this up. He put a thing up on the wall and said, look, one day you won't have your name above a locker and you're going to be paying to play the game you love. One day you won't have a strength coach working with you. You're going to be paying a trainer to work with you. One day you won't have a gym to access. You're going to pay to access a gym. One day you won't get medical treatment on tap. You're going to be paying for physical therapy. Like, embrace what we call, embrace the suck is a phrase, right? Embrace the grind. But what you call the grind is actually a lifestyle and a work is a thing that many, many people pay to try and emulate. And, so enjoy it where you can. And I think that's a message that really stuck with me.
Yeah. And just on this idea of choices, I think there's a great story of Peyton Manning when he left his first team, the Colts. He had all these different options of teams to go to, and he chose Denver, and they said, how do you know you're making it the right decision? And he said, I'm going to do what it takes to make it the right decision in terms of doing those daily choices. So you started in rugby at age of 23?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
And then what was your biggest takeaway from getting thrown into the fire as such a young guy?
There's obviously a number of learning experiences that you go through and stuff, and about how you talk to players, how you interact with players. But I think one of the things that I remember, I sat with a coach once, and I said, I don't understand why the players can't see this. I don't understand why they're not. And the coach said to me, Clive, how many years have you been at university? And I was like, this is my 7th year. He's like, Clive, most of these guys didn't finish high school. Right? They run into a brick wall for a living, then they get up and they do it again, and they'll do it again even when they're crawling on their hands and knees. Right? You don't think like they do, therefore don't try and understand them. And that for me was a real big, like, okay, at a young age, it taught me that actually I've got to try and, rather than trying to say this is my logic and I need to imply it in every situation, it's like, how can I see through the lens of the person I'm dealing with? Now, whether that's a medical member of staff, a coach, an athlete, how can I see through their lens? How do I get an insight into what they're seeing that will either improve what I do or help that understanding, or find a way that I can communicate the need and the desire, So, I've just been out now on the turf outside with a baseball player. And we've been working on some specific stuff with regards to his movement, but it's largely, we spent 20 minutes trying to find the cue for him that actually worked, and it comes about through, speed work is great because you can do a repetition, then there's a natural break and recovery where you can discuss and then do, and finally after about 20 minutes, he's like, oh, I get it now. It's that I need to think about, if I think about my pelvic position, it brings everything else into line. I'm like, good, think that. Right. And the next 2 reps were great. And it would be better than, what we'd done the previous, rest of the session. But it was because we were trying to find that lens that worked for him and trying to find that cue that literally just got everything to click. So I think that's a key lesson. But I think in every environment I've been in, I've learned, I learn a heap from everybody.
And then in terms of creating habits and choices, do you believe cueing, I know, is such a huge part of coaching, but do you believe that could be valuable for people in terms of developing positive habits, having certain cues?
Oh, 100%. Go back to, I think dietitians are really good at this. They spend a lot of time with people trying to talk about, and again, what we talked about earlier on, every individual is different, right? There's no such thing as the right diet, because if an individual doesn't like the food, that's the starting point, right? You got to, what food do you like? That's the stuff you'll eat. Base the diet on that. So trying to find things that will, whether it's a visual cue, a verbal cue, a habit cue, trying to find things that will kickstart that for the person, I think is vitally important. It's we all work off certain things that remind us to do stuff at certain times, and so how we develop those cues or develop those routines is something I think that all of us as professionals in this space can help people with.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And then where did you go from the rugby club?
So England rugby got to a point where they needed someone who was actually old enough and experienced enough and wise enough to know what they were doing, right? Which wasn't me. So I went back into a role where I was part-time lecturing and researching. I was working with so I worked with a soccer team. I carried on working in rugby with a rugby club, and then started working with, Olympic athletes and that sort of thing. So, and that period of time went through the Sydney Olympics, and I did my first Wimbledon in 2000. And that was a journey that lasted 20 years when I was part of the sports medicine team at Wimbledon Tennis Championships, which was a great 3 week of my life for 20 years. Gave me a different world to work with. And, so I went from there, carried on working predominantly in rugby to 2003. And then I went to Scotland and was the lead for athlete development. So I worked across all sports,
Wow.
Soccer, rugby, judo, swimming, track and field, and still carried on my passion and love of coaching. So although I was working with all these sports and the actual coaches for all the sports and the leads, I was still doing a lot of coaching again with professional athletes, but also, some of my most fun stuff was on a Tuesday and Thursday night. We were running like drop-in clinics for volunteer athletes to come in, and then I would get coaches who come and say to me, well, look, I want to come and learn to coach. I'm like, Tuesday, Thursday nights, come along to the National Track and Field Centre in Grangemouth, and you can coach, and I'll help you coach. And then some of them developed into really good coaches who are still doing now, and a lot of them were like, well, yeah, but this is not the best athletes. I'm like, I don't really coach the best athletes, Hey, we might talk about a little intricacy and technique, or I'm going to say harder, or I'm going to say faster, but the coaching is really different with those guys. Because
Sure.
they know a lot of the stuff already, So you want to really see coaching, you got to do it with the kids, and do it with those that don't know. So coaching is about behavior change, whether that's in a weight room or out of the weight room, right? So with the elite athletes, we're shaping and we're tweaking, but we're tweaking things that your coaching eye is not experienced enough to see. So you're not going to learn a lot. So the question is, do you want to come and watch the coaching, or do you want to come and watch the athletes do some impressive stuff? They're different discussions, right? But the actual, I got a lot of passion out of just coaching those kids, and I still do now. It's in the evenings now. I still work with high school kids and stuff, and I really get a lot out of that, in terms of enjoyment and going back to helping shape the young lives, and help those kids get better.
I love that. And then, real quick on. Rugby, of course, is very intense, and then something like Wimbledon is so intense. What were some of the recovery modalities that you guys focused on in terms of metrics?
Metrics was interesting because at the time, back in the rugby days, there wasn't a lot of actual technology around that was accessible that would enable us to measure that, if that makes sense. Now, so we were doing a lot of stuff around just self-report. Like, how many hours do you think you slept last night? Link the quality in nutrition. We were doing resting heart rate every morning, those kind of things. We were taking body weight every day. We were able to do things like jump tests in the mornings. That technology became accessible early with the jump mat. So, and the thought at the time was, if we can measure the neuromuscular system and see how high a player was jumping, then, it gives us an idea about how prepared they are and how ready they are. What we probably found was in the early years is that the fact that we're jumping them every day, they were probably not just getting fatigued physically, they were just getting fed up with jumping, and therefore the effort level just wasn't there, So, but years later, even, down to my last professional club in Columbus Crew, we were still doing jump tests once a week. We were doing groin squeeze tests. We were doing hamstring strain scores, all those kind of things that we were still doing in the morning just to get an idea of preparedness. We were just mixing it up a little bit so that the players weren't getting fatigued with the same measure, And then, heart rate variability became a big thing for us, a little bit further down the line and that sort of stuff. So, we could use that. And try and track that over a 24-hour period to look at, player fluctuations. But, the interesting thing about, the best of the best and, the real true professionals is when they're fatigued, they're going to find a way anyway, So, you know, at the Blue Jays, for example, we introduced sleep monitoring and heart rate variability, and we introduced technology that would give the players a color coding score of readiness in the morning. And, you know, I remember one morning a pitcher coming into me and saying, Clive, I'm pitching tonight and it says I'm red. You know, should I pitch? I'm like, oh, hell yeah. You know, what we got to do is to find a way of accepting the fact that you're in the red, but trying to understand why that is and then get you re-energized because you're pitching whether you're ready or not. You know, so that it changes the discussion now from not like how prepared are you to how do we get you better prepared. And that was a real important discussion for us, you know. So I think things like, you know, sleep monitoring, for example, at the Jays, we did that. We started that as some research with Sherry Marr at San Francisco, Stanford University, and it became the first study that was published in professional baseball on sleep habits in spring training. But the important stuff for us wasn't what the research showed us. It was the fact that it got athletes talking about sleep and it got coaches talking about sleep. And because they were talking about sleep, it became important to them. And therefore we could start to influence it. And then we actually changed the spring training schedule on the back of it because they realized that getting up at 4 a.m. wasn't useful because it got in the way of sleep. You know, so we could push things back in the day. And, you know, so those sorts of things became much more important for us, you know.
Yeah, the best are going to find a way to perform like the best no matter what is, I think, so true. And then I think it's an opportunity for all of us to understand that. And then also to understand, again, I think going back to the fundamentals and understanding the more of a foundation you have, I think the more you have in the reservoir to be able to, if you're showing up red and it's the day of your performance, that you can still go out there and dominate like you want to dominate.
Yeah. I mean, we did some stuff. I mean, mentally, it was really funny. And well, for example, in rugby, the coaches used to talk about going into the arm wrestle. And the idea for that was like, rugby is a sport where you can directly correlate intensity of play to outcome. Right? So the more intense you can make the play, the less, you know, the more chance you've got of beating the opposition. You can out-physical the opponent. And so the coaches used to talk a lot about getting into the arm wrestle, and they used to say to players a lot, it's like, I never, never, never want to hear you say tired, right? Tired is a mental thing. You've got to be mentally strong enough to take your opponent to the point where you're both tired, you're in that arm wrestle, then it's who wants it more, right? And so, and we looked at that scientifically. I mean, we published a paper a number of years ago where we tracked like soreness through the week, and we'd find that they play a game Sunday, they'd be really sore Monday, the soreness would dissipate. By the following game, we're good to go. You know, and then there's a period of time at Easter where there was a game on Friday and a game on Monday. Right? So if you imagine the game, the way I describe rugby is like, imagine running 8 miles of sprints and then having a car drive into you 4 times on the way, right? And that's what it feels like to have played a game of rugby. And these guys will play a game, and then 2 days later, they got to go and do it again, right? Now, what we found was that they play on the Friday. On Saturday, they were really sore. On Sunday, they were partially recovered. And on Monday, they weren't sore at all. Now, physically, that made no sense, right? But it was all a mental thing about the players. Like, no, it's game day. I'm good to go. You know? They find a way. It's like, yeah, sure, they're nowhere near prepared. Physically, they're really sore, but, like, tough. You know, we're good to go.
Real quick, how do you feel like people listening to this could potentially apply that same mindset to their lives, which I think is super powerful?
Look, I think mindset is everything. You know, actually, I'm going to steal a quote from one of my athletes who the other day. It was great. The environment we've got here is wonderful, and so you know, we had an athlete in 2 weeks ago, and she's just competed at the World Ironman Triathlon this weekend. And, you know, talk about a sport that's mentally tough, right, is the Ironman. And there's a high school athlete working next to her, and she is a phenomenal kid, and she's a great athlete, and she's doing some really, really great things in the weight room. But I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I can do it. And Rachel, the Ironman triathlete, just turned to her and said, Hudson, you know, whether you think you will or whether you think you won't, you'll be right. You know? And it was great when an athlete can say that to a kid. And I think that's the key thing with a lot of this stuff is like, you know, often when you're tired, and I mean, I did a rowing session the weekend, and I'm 3/4 way through, and I'm like, Jesus, I can't get through that. I'm done, right? The rowing machine always beats me every time. But, you know, then you just say to yourself, look, all I got to do is get to the finish line. Like, doesn't matter how quick I get there, I've just got to get to the finish line, right? And I've just got to, like, let's just do 1 more minute at this pace. 1 more minute, and then I can relax. Well, I've got through this 1 more minute now, so, like, let's do the next minute. And I can, you know, and it gets you through. It's by achieving those short-term goals. And, you know, if you speak to the guys in Special Forces, they'll tell you, like, from the start of their selection process, their goal is to get through that day. Because if they get through that day, they can quit tomorrow. Right? And that's just it. I'm going to get through today so I can quit tomorrow. I'm going to win today. And I think that's the same thing that applies to a lot of people. And it just goes back to how can I make those short-term goals that can build into a longer-term perspective? You know, if I'm inactive, how can I get more active? Is there somewhere, you know, could I park the car 100 yards away and walk a bit more? You know, could I find the time to cycle to work? Could I rearrange things a little bit more so I can meal prep better? Is there, you know, it's how can I set my short-term goals that enable the longer-term goals to be achievable without you even realizing it?
And then resiliency is something that comes up with our adult population and for parents of kids who we work with. We want for their kid athletes, where it's the same issue of I want to become more resilient, and or my kid's very talented. But we're concerned about their confidence, their ability to handle when things get tough. Do you have any specific techniques that you've seen, like what you potentially talked about there with the rower, of breaking it down to, you know, micro goals and focusing just on the next step that can help people improve their resiliency?
Yeah, but I think the first thing I always say to people is, like, you know, if you want to become more resilient, you've got to be subjected to adversity, right? You can never learn to overcome challenge if you are not challenged, right? And so it's very much about how can you expose, in a supported way, right? How do you expose the young athlete to adversity? And, you know, I remember again early in my career, you know, I was talking to someone and they said, look, if you actually look at the athletes who make it, okay, there's the phenoms in this world. They're going to make it no matter what, right? All you can do with those guys is try not to screw them up, right? They're gonna make it regardless. But then there's everyone else, right? There's outside of those true phenoms, there's everyone else, and there's always the kids who we can all identify them. They were the blue flamers in high school who suddenly, and they went through college and then you never heard from them again. And what actually happens is with those guys, if they succeed, the first time they actually come against adversity, they don't know how to deal with it, and it absolutely crushes them, you know? Whereas those of us who weren't quite as talented growing up or whatever, you know, I got selected for the program, then I got selected, then I didn't get selected. I'm like, shit, why didn't I get selected? I need to work harder, right? So I'd work harder, or I'd change my strategy, then I'd get selected, and I wouldn't get selected. It's like, okay, why did I not get selected this time? Think about it, go away, rework, replan, because I'd actually been exposed to adversity and I'd failed, right? And if you can't learn anything without failing, if that makes sense, right? So I think for those people that want to build resilience in young athletes, is you've got to find ways of making it tough for them that, yes, enables some success, but also actually exposes them to what does tough really feel like. And I think that they're, you know, whatever, you know, those people that don't understand that or want to provide everything for their children, typically are not. If everything's provided for the kids, they never know how to work for it, you know? So that's the sort of thing I spend time thinking about with people. And then once they're in the mix, then it's about, okay, now we build the tools. Now we build the short-term goal setting. Now we build the cognitive refocusing strategies. And this is where, you know, I work hand in hand with sports psychologists to help that, you know, they're expert in helping the athlete do that, and then providing me with tools and insights that I can use with this athlete to say, okay, this is the way to reinforce what we're working on with this. You know, so I never want to. The mental performance experts are invaluable in this process.
And then in all your experience working in pro sports the past 25 years, where do you feel like in terms of who ends up in the top 25 in the world in tennis or in the major leagues in baseball or in professional soccer, how many of those are, the phenoms compared to how many of those are the ones that just consistently were persistent and diligent and overcame adversity?
Oh, I mean, I think it's, but even the phenoms, right? I mean, I don't say no one's ever fallen into a world championship or the best in the world, right? So even the phenoms have all worked their butts off, right? They are the true professionals. If you think about tennis, if you think about, the Nadal, Djokovic, Federer, Andy Murray, the guys that have dominated the top four in the world for the last few years, they work their butts off, They're really diligent. They're really, and the other thing is, honestly, they have a true love for what they do. You don't get to be that good if you don't have the passion for what they do, right? So, don't get me wrong in the sense of that they don't work. It's just that there are some other people who've had adversity on the way. You've just got to work differently or harder and overcome that sort of stuff to be able to achieve it as well. So, look, performance is so multifactorial, and so there's going to be a number of people, but to have, we talk a lot about like the performance gear turning, and that performance gear has got a number of other gears attached to it. And those gears are character, environment, fitness, health, psychological characteristics, etc. And then each of those gears have got their own little gears as well. And all of those gears have got to turn in cadence. If one of those gears is turning in a different cadence to any of the other gears, the performance gear doesn't work, right?
That's awesome. Do you have that reference somewhere?
No, I mean, I think it's just something we've evolved over a number of years,
Okay. Seeing where people define it.
You can use that metaphor in a number of ways, because, and I'm trying to think where I first heard it, and it may have been through Istvan Bali in Canada, the gear analogy.
Yeah.
But we also use it in the same way as, like, everyone sees the athlete, which is the car, but then underneath the car there's the engine, and the engine is the support staff around it. The engine is the coach, but then the coach is driven by a gearbox, and the gearbox is the support staff. So all of those things about gears turning and, everything coming together can be used in a number of different ways, right, to try and understand what performance is. But the point about the whole gear system is if those gears aren't turning the same time, same direction, then elite performance doesn't happen. And that's why Olympic medals are so, so special, because the coach and the athlete have practiced over a number of years to get everything right so that on the day when it most matters, the gears turn and they work together and performance happens. And it's why it's such a unique thing, And you can never say someone's a phenom. They were just born to this. That isn't the case, because there are, I truly believe that in every elementary school there's a world champion, right? But there just needs to be the case of opportunity and the right people and the right set of characteristics for all of that to come together for the world champion to actually emerge, right? None of it is down to luck. I was lucky in the opportunity I got in my first job, but I tell you what, if I screwed that up, I wouldn't have got a second one. Yeah. And I wouldn't have got a third one. People come back to you because you do a good job and because you're a good person to work with. But it's the same thing with an athlete developing. They keep getting opportunities because they keep doing a good job and they keep working to achieve. I don't know what the balance is between those that that are phenoms and those that work to get there. But they've all worked. Don't take anything away from that down the road.
Yeah, I agree. And then just referencing the Olympics there, a big theme that we go back to here at SuperAthlete is treat your life like you're in a world-class training camp, or think like, what is your personal Super Bowl? Of course, we don't have 99.9% of us don't have a Super Bowl coming up, but we all have things in our lives that are really important to us. Could you maybe talk a little bit about, like, you mentioned briefly with the rugby players of when it's game day, just kind of the level of intensity that comes up, but when athletes know that they have like a big event, just in terms of how that really puts a foundation on terms of the level of intensity that raises. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think in anything in life, it's about like, you need to, it's about knowing when to switch on and when to switch off, if that makes sense, you know? In the Blue Jays, they turned it really well with the athletes. They talked about when do you turn on, when do you turn off, and when do you turn down, and when do you turn away.
I love that.
And, you know, the mental performance staff did a really, really good job at putting that on. So, you know, they talked about turn up strategies, turn off strategies, turn down strategies, and turn away strategies. And I think that there are those things in life where, my wife, lover is keeps coming back to me and saying, look, you need to turn off from the athlete programs or tracking the athlete or putting your phone down or, you know, those sorts of stuff. You need to find strategies that you can use to turn off from that, because you're going to be far more effective than when you're, you know, in your work time. And I think that's exactly right. You know, it's about identifying if everything is a priority in life, nothing's a priority. Right? You can't be everything to all people all the time. So it's about knowing what is the priority at that point in time, and then how do you put everything behind making that work. You know, I think you said it yourself earlier on. There's no such thing in life as a bad decision as long as you back the decision you make. Right? So if you've got something you want to do, what are the things that you need to do to align to make that happen and make you good at that, to be able to chase that dream? And then what are the things that are going to detract from that? And if you can align those two up together, then things can happen.
And going back to Game Changers, measuring testosterone was one of the key metrics that I think it was one of the rugby sports scientists used to check preparation for their athletes. In terms of hormone levels and things like that, is that stuff that you look into now? You find it's important for people?
Yeah, very much so. And in terms of, I mean, we try and take the approach here we treat everybody and they say it's the athlete model, right? We can surround people with physiotherapists, with doctors, etc. So the question then is about, well, what's the level of resource and that you want to put into this, right? So look, if someone wants to come in and we can help them be a better weekend warrior, that's great. They're not going to need the same level of resource as someone who's saying, look, I want to throw everything 100% and I want to challenge to go on the World Amateur Golf Tour, right? Because I've got enough money that I can sustain this lifestyle, and golf's my passion. I don't think I'm ever going to be a pro, but I can go on the World Amateur Tour. So let's throw everything at it, right? So yeah, then we can start looking at hormone testing, blood testing, all those kind of things, and look, none of them are going to predict performance, right? We talk a lot about, like, with coaches. I've been really lucky in the sense of, like, every professional team I've worked with has either been to a playoffs when I've been there or has won a national championship in the year I've been there.
Wow, that's amazing.
So now, look, I'm not saying that's down to me, right, at all, because performance is multifactorial. Winning is always down to the athletes and coaches, right? But what I can demonstrate in all those environments is three things. One is the athletes. I can demonstrate the athletes are always more prepared. And we can show changes in preparedness. We talked about some of those measures earlier on. I can demonstrate an increase in physical performance, and I don't necessarily mean they lift more in the gym, right, or they get further in a running test. What I mean is they make more meters in a game. Their sprint distances in soccer, for example, in Columbus Crew, by the end of my first preseason, guys were sprinting one standard deviation more in a game in 60 minutes than they were in 90 minutes the previous year, right? So our sprint volume had increased massively, which meant our physical capacity had gone up, right? Which meant we could play the game better the way the coach wanted the game to be played. And then the third measure, and I think this is probably as important, if not more important than the others, is increased player availability, right? So the coach has got more athletes, better athletes to choose from at any point in time.
Yeah.
So, my role at any one point in time is to say, look, yeah, we're achieving better results. But my role is to say players are better prepared, better physical characteristics, and they're more available, right? How do we do that? And it's by taking care of the small details. It's by, things like looking at testosterone, looking at cortisol levels, how are we managing the stress hormones, right? So testosterone, measure of preparedness and training response, cortisol, a measure of stress and training adaptation. So, we would look at those things and how can we adapt it and how can we move things through. And, the same thing can definitely be applied to the general population. If someone's highly stressed and they're producing stress hormones, when good luck with trying to lose body fat. It's just not going to happen.
And then specifically you would say because the cortisol is causing inflammation in the body?
Yeah.
And then could you, in terms of your experience, what are some specific things that have you seen that have helped lower cortisol, other than potentially adjusting workload for athletes?
We've done a number of things in terms of different recovery strategies. So we've worked with an increased blood flow technology they're called Firefly. So basically, when the athlete is they're sedentary, so they're sat down. We used it a ton on travel after games. It stimulates the common peroneal nerve. That increases blood flow up to 400 times when the athlete's sedentary. That helps to just regulate and it increased testosterone levels quicker. But it reduced cortisol levels a lot quicker, We've also done some stuff with cold water immersion, and I don't mean like standard ice baths, right? There's a lot of evidence to show that really doesn't work. But if you put someone...
You haven't been watching social media.
Sorry?
I said you haven't been watching social media then.
Oh, look. But a lot of the stuff where, if you actually look at a lot of the stuff about cold water immersion, it's about they actually get into deep water. Right?
Interesting.
And there's a difference, right? I'll tell you now, if you can't get into cold water, and I'm at Wimbledon, we put in 8 cold water immersion tubs, at every club I've been in, I've put in cold water immersion tubs, but those tubs are specifically designed, we're with a company called CryoSpa. So these tubs they're designed, they put you in 4.5 feet of deep water. So there's a hydrostatic pressure component there. And not only that, there's a flow of water that takes the temperature away from your body. So you're losing heat by convection as well as conduction. So if you get into a normal ice bath, right, with no water depth, firstly, there's no hydrostatic pressure, which means that probably the most valuable thing to you has been removed, right? Secondly, the water is static. So you get into the ice bath, you heat up the water around you. There's a natural barrier there that's produced. Your skin temperature doesn't change, therefore your muscle temperature is going to change very little. Whereas if you're in everybody knows the wind chill effect, right? Being in Toronto in January, that was like, I knew the wind chill effect like really well. It's the same in cold water, right? So if you're in cold water and you've got moving water, it's constantly taking the temperature away. You're going to lose temperature a lot quicker, right? So the water has what you want, right? Which is what you want, right? Yeah. So the key for me is having, and the other thing is I want, if you've got multiple players coming in, I want some chemicals and some filtration in there, right? So the cold water immersion we used is deep cold water, about 50 degrees centigrade, and then it was moving and it was filtered. Now that gave us a lot of good recovery benefits, but it only gave us good recovery benefits. And I remember one player, for example, this was one rugby player, and he was 3 times my size, and he was tougher than hell, and blah, blah, blah. But he would tell me, Clive, the most stressful thing I do in a week is you picking me up and carrying me and dumping me in that ice bath, right? And once you actually get to understand that, there's no way of being in an ice bath for him is going to reduce his cortisol levels. In fact, it's going to increase them because it's so stressful for him. There's just no point. Yeah. Right? So again, you start to tailor those recovery strategies for what suits the individual. One size is not going to fit all, So the players that found the ice baths beneficial, yeah, they got them. The players that found them stressful didn't. We looked for them. We looked at massage. We looked at other forms of recovery. So, and I think this is where the various levels of science come in for us. at a research level, it's about producing very generic principles that work for the majority of people, right? And then, our job as practitioners is to learn from those generic principles and say, okay, this works for the multitude of people. How can I take that and extrapolate it to my athlete or my group of athletes and make it work better for them so that we increase their chances of success?
And then I cut you off there. What are some additional, if you can communicate, what are some additional things in terms of lowering cortisol and raising testosterone you mentioned? So you mentioned the deep water, 50 degrees. You mentioned the Firefly technology.
Yeah. So we use those. But, I mean, honestly, most of them are nutritional, sleep. It's about those good habits, right? So nutrition, hydration, and sleep. Take away those three. You called them the fundamentals earlier on. You're exactly right. Take away those three things, and there's, the rest of it, we're just tinkering with little stuff, right? Honestly, there wasn't a lot of, there's not a lot of magic potion I can give you that says we did this and that had that. It's literally around those things. So, making sure that players have got good sleep hygiene. I mean, again, at the Jays, we made sure that when we went on the road, every player had a sleep number so that we could phone them up and say, this player's in this room, the mattress has to have this sleep number. The players traveled with their own pillow. We gave them all a number of neck pillows to try. They could choose their preference on neck pillow for the plane. We gave them all different pillows to try. They could choose their preference for sleeping in. We gave them different eye shades. So pick the eye shade that works better for you. We worked with the sleep expert, Dr. Sherry Marr, and said, look, how can we get the best sleep routines and travel routines on the plane, and then we give them to the players, and the players say, yeah, Clive, thanks, but I'm not going to nap for an hour and a half at this point, and I'm still going to eat my cookie and whatever, and that's what works for me. Okay, great, it's work with the athlete. So for, I think for us, we spent a lot of time really trying to get the fundamentals in place, and I hear a lot. British Cycling talked a lot about marginal gains, and they talk about the 1%ers. And the 1%ers are right when you've got the 99% in place. And honestly, for most people, the 99% is exactly where it's at, right? If you're not getting that 8 hours of sleep a night and quality sleep, then it doesn't matter how much I fluctuate your training levels, you're never going to be optimal.
And then when talking about quality sleep, I assume you're talking about like REM and deep sleep. In your experience looking at all these sleep scores, is there anything that stands out to you that potentially are big levers to pull in impacting us getting more REM sleep and more deep sleep? Not really. I mean, I think honestly, unless there's so many of these things out there that actually one of the things I found is the number of different technologies that I've applied. The one thing that's universal about them all is they can't seem to, and we did a number of studies where we were sleeping with 3 or 4 of them on, right? And they couldn't agree about when you're in REM sleep, deep sleep, blah, blah, blah. They're getting a lot better, trust me. But, generally what we found was much more about is the volume of sleep that the athlete got. Okay. Yes, ideally they want those sleep cycles. Yes, ideally they want this much REM sleep and this much deep sleep. But trying to influence that largely is about making sure that the athlete they're in the right psychological frame of mind going to bed. They're in the right level of physiological activation going to bed, and then they're in the right environment going to bed. And I think they're the 3 things that we spent a lot of time trying to work on, and so we worked with, we called them sleep stealers, right? So, and video games are a classic for young athletes. Video games is huge. So, and some of the players said, look, okay, well, we need to do that to unwind from a game, right? And baseball's tough, trying to get a sleep routine, because you're a starting pitcher, you got 8 rounds on the mound, you're going to finish at 10 o'clock at night, you're amped up. Yeah. Same thing with the rugby players. If they played an evening game, we start at 7:30, you finish at 9:30, they have got so much adrenaline, so much testosterone, so much caffeine as well going around their system, like they're not going to go to sleep till 4 a.m., right? Yeah. You've got to find a way to help them unwind from that. And, and playing video games is a way sometimes of helping them unwind. But there's a point where it crosses from this helps me to I need to do this. It becomes a routine, and it becomes an addiction, right? And like, can they turn off from it and turn away from it versus they need to do it? And I think that's where we spend a lot of time with those guys on
on things like sleep stealers, you know. So, but looking at routines to develop around, you know, your sleep habits, no stimulation for the hour you go to bed, you know, develop something that's going to put you in a cold, dark, quiet place. Understand that if you're not asleep within the first 20 minutes, then go and do something else, change the focus momentarily, and then come back and try it again. You know, those kind of things. Make sure the room is cold, the bed is warm. Make sure you know your room is dark. There's there's not a lot of background lighting. You know, all those things that we found about routine sleep hygiene, that really influenced how the athlete felt the following morning. You know, and then sleep cycles tended to take care of themselves. You know, and it's going to take an expertise much above my level of sophistication to be able to talk about how do you actually influence those things. You know? Yeah,
I think it's what you're saying. It's finding this balance of consistently working to improve, while alongside that, understanding that how can I show up today and perform if I did eat that cookie yesterday, or if I didn't sleep that well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, for me, it's and again, it's about rules are for the guidance of wise men and the obeyance of fools, right? Mm-hmm. So if your routine becomes that rigid that if you deviate from it slightly, you're going to fall off a ledge, it becomes a problem, right? So what it's about is where can you follow routines and structures and guidance that put you in a good place, knowing that if there might be a little interruption to that, it's not going to knock you off completely, you know? I know for example, for me, I'm not, if I take a day off, like in a weekend, and I have no physical stimulation and no mental stimulation, I'm not going to sleep at night. I know that. Right. So I have to make sure that, you know, like days off are great. We love days off. They're important to us, right? It's where we live our best lives. And, you know, no matter how passionate I am about, I love what I do. And I love spending time with my family and going and doing stuff as well. But at some point in that day, I need to do something that's either going to stimulate me and tire me out mentally, or stimulate me and tire me out physically to put me in the best place for sleep at that night. I know that, and it works for me. So I just have to build it in.
Yeah.
You know?
And then talking about days off, in your experience, where have you seen the dynamic in terms of preventing athletes from overtraining and or getting burned out? Is that something that's been common, or it's athletes want it so bad that it's not that big of an issue in your career?
No, I think it's more about an education process. I mean, where I see it most at the minute is in the high school level. You know, by the time someone gets to elite, they pretty much know what works for them and what doesn't. You know, they've gone past that stage of, I need to push myself to excess here, because they've been through enough environments to know when they're on and when they're off, if that makes sense. So I think, you know, for me, it's much more about in that learning process and the education process. And we had a volleyball athlete here who ended up with 2 stress fractures in her foot because she did a high school practice, then went and did a private lesson with a coach on volleyball where they did jumping and approach work. Then they went and did a private strength and conditioning session.
Okay.
Then they went to the club session and did strength and conditioning session with the club. Then they did a jumping session in the club volleyball program. So it was their 5th session of the day, and ended up with 2 stress fractures. And none of that became apparent until you actually talk to the athlete afterwards. Like, what are you actually doing to get stress fractures in your feet? And, you know, that's where I find is a lot of the education is at the minute is, you know, and we spend a lot of time here balancing off with, you know, high school programs and club programs, and then, you know, our athletic development program on top of that. And it was funny. I don't often engage in social media debates, but there was someone who, you know, on a high school debate the other day asked me to comment, and someone else turned around and said, well, Clive, you are the problem. That's everything that's wrong at the minute with high school athletics. which I kind of took personally a little bit, but and I get what they were trying to say, and they were trying to say is that the kids will spend time with private coaches, and they're also doing the high school stuff, and the high school stuff is important, you know. Whereas what we do with high school athletes, look, I understand kids need to work out with the team, right? It's part of their culture and part of their process. The poor high school coach has got 45 kids to try and coach. These kids don't know technique. The only thing they really value is how much load is on the bar. You know, the coach is not set up for success in the environment they got. I'm working with kids one-on-one, one-on-two, one-on-three, right? I don't care how much load they're lifting. I care about how much technique they're developing and what their posture is, and are they learning good habits. So what we try and do here is to balance that off and say, okay, so the kid, what are you doing in high school at the minute? I'm not going to replicate that. What are you doing in club at the minute? I'm not going to replicate that. How can I best prepare you for those two environments and complement that work so that we don't overtrain and overcook you, you know? And then in the off season, then we can get after it and work hard. And I think that's largely where we're at now. And you know, I run a number of programs here where we interact with the club to say, okay, look, whether it's hockey, what are you doing on the ice at the minute? How do we best prepare the athletes for that and provide them with the skills they're going to need when they move on to college, right? Volleyball, you know, a lot of people think, well, volleyball athletes jump a lot, therefore strength and conditioning needs to be a lot of plyometric stuff. Well, actually in volleyball, they're already jumping a lot. So the best thing we can do is to spend a little bit of time reinforcing good jumping technique. And we can do that with low intensity drills. And then we can build their strength up so that they've got the strength to be able to be resilient enough with the technique for the jumps that they do. You know, it's not about replicating what they do, because then we're just doubling down on the problem, you know. So I think that communication between all of those levels is the key issue. And it's probably the one area at the minute where I see most overtraining and overemphasis on, like, I gotta do more work, I gotta do more work, I gotta do more work. Whereas, you know, when I think back to the start of my career, you talked about the time in Great Britain when, you know, some athletes were full-time professional in track and other athletes were just as professional but had a job to do, you know? And the difference wasn't in how much work those athletes did. It was the full-time athletes just had more time to recover. They did the same amount of work, you know? Professional athletes is about working hard for a short period of time in the day, maybe 3 or 4 hours, and then spend the rest of the time. When we worked out with the rugby players, we typically had 20 hours a week with them, right? That included everything. Film time, meetings, nutrition, you know, recovery, as well as, you know, training was only going to be an hour, hour and a half a day, and then, you know, maybe weights 2 or 3 times a week on top of that. There's not a lot of contact time with players. It's largely about how do they best manage the downtime around that to be the best they can on game day.
Yeah, so it's having that self-awareness. And then I guess for younger athletes, it would be having mom or dad with them collaborating on really getting in tune on what's
it's knowing what's the best for this athlete at this time. And when I look, you know, some of these high school kids who are, you know, starting at 7 in the morning and their day's not finishing till 11:30 at night, you know, and then it's like, you know, sleep, rinse, repeat. That's really tough. So it's about how can we work with those guys to really manage those stressors, because stressors become additive, right? So how can we manage that and get the most out of practice time? And, you know, talking to coaches and saying, do we really need 4-hour practices for these kids? And, you know, that sort of stuff is how can you get the best balance across the two so the athlete can train, can recover, and can adapt and can keep getting better. Otherwise, you're into that world of attrition, right? It's like those that survive progress, and those that don't. And that's not where we want to be.
Yeah, that's not training smart. That's not working smart, and that's not what we were talking about earlier in terms of being able to fully turn on and then fully turn off.
100%. Yeah.
Cool. Well, this has been absolutely amazing, Clive. We appreciate you so much with your wisdom. Again, you're very humble, but with all the teams that you worked with, to say that they've all made at least the playoffs is a pretty extraordinary track record. Is there any way you'd like to end in terms of this? And do you have anything that you'd like to say in terms of the importance of human performance and or what you feel is most important for people to look at?
You know, for me, I just want, you know, I think that, our job that we do best, and something I try and do best every day, is, you want to be the best, the best version of yourself at every opportunity, right? And every day. And, my athletes, I know they want to turn up knowing that they're going to face the same Clive Brewer every day. He's not going to be this one day and that another day. He's like, true performance in life exists when you've got consistency, right? So I think in any form of life you can get is like, what is it that you need to do to consistently be the best person that you can be every day? Understand what it is that puts you in a really good position, and do it. Understand what doesn't work so well for you and try and avoid it. And also understand that, in life, a little bit of what you like is also good for you. It's that 80-20 rule that everybody talks about, right? And I fundamentally agree with that. Things, then, you can achieve consistency, and you can achieve the best version of yourself every day. And whether you're a CEO, whether you're an athlete, whether you're a parent, your job is important to a huge number of people in life, and you really want to be the best you can. So seek out the guidance and seek out the people that bring out the best in you, and stick with those guys, and and good luck.
That's beautiful. I love that. Yeah, people want to see the good, consistent Clive Brewer, not the Clive Brewer that's the worst thing that American high school sports has ever encountered.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And I don't know how they drew that conclusion, and you kind of look back and go, yeah, I'm not sure, but I understand what they meant, right? And again, It was a frustrated high school coach who, who is what he is. But look, Chase, it's been a lot of fun. I appreciate you taking the time and asking the questions. I've enjoyed the discussion a lot.
I appreciate you so much, Clive, and I look forward to meeting you in person. Thank you so much.
Good forward. Thanks, guys. Good luck.
Thanks.